29 years. And 3 days, I whispered to myself as I stared at the manila folder on the polished desk. My name is Melody Reynolds. I'm 61 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer at one of St. Paul's largest manufacturing companies. I gave my entire adult life to GRW manufacturing, late nights spent reviewing contracts, weekends sacrificed for emergencies, even missing my daughter's recitals, so I could finalize reports that no one else had the patience to comb through. And yet here I was being dismissed like a disposable file. David Langston leaned back in his leather chair, his voice cool and almost rehearsed. Budget constraints, he said, eyes avoiding mine, effective immediately. Budget constraints. The company had just announced record profits last quarter. I knew better. This wasn't about budgets. This was about timing. My pension, the nest egg I had worked for nearly 3 decades, was set to vest on Monday, just 3 days away. They hadn't stumbled into this decision, they had calculated it to the hour. I lifted the folder, feeling the weight of 30 years reduced to a few sheets of legal jargon. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said quietly, refusing to give him tears. He looked startled, perhaps expecting a breakdown, maybe even begging. But I had spent too many years studying patterns of dishonesty to mistake what this was. I left his office with my dignity intact. Janet from HR hovered beside me as I packed the potted plant my daughter had given me 15 years ago, the photo of my late husband Thomas, in his Navy uniform, and the plaque commemorating 25 years of dedicated service. 25 years they had celebrated me then. And now, less than 4 years later, they had escorted me out with a guard like I was a criminal. The April rain beat against my windshield as I drove home, memories spilling over me. I thought of Thomas, gone 12 years now, who had once told me integrity isn't convenient. Melody, it's necessary. He would have known what to do. I thought of Elizabeth, my daughter in Denver, who believed her mother's years of loyalty would one day be rewarded with peace and security. How was I going to tell her this? Inside my kitchen, I finally opened the severance package. My jaw tightened as I read 3 months' salary in exchange for signing away all rights to future claims. No pension, no health care, no acknowledgement of 29 years of service, just a check and a gag order. I set the papers aside and walked to my home office. Behind a row of family albums was a fireproof box. For 4 years, my instincts had told me to keep records, copies of loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, even emails instructing staff to backdate certifications. I hadn't planned to use them, not really. But I knew something was wrong and I had documented everything. I pulled the box onto the desk and unlocked it. Over 1,000 pages of evidence stared back at me. Evidence of fraud, deception, and cover-ups, all of which I had flagged through proper channels only to be ignored. Suddenly the pieces fell into place. My termination wasn't just about avoiding my pension. It was about silencing me before I escalated further. I reached for my phone. My hands didn't shake. My mind was clear. I scrolled until I found the number of someone I hadn't called in years. Gregory Santos, once our chief financial officer, now with the Securities and Exchange Commission. He had always respected my diligence, even when others rolled their eyes at my tedious detail. It was time. That night I spoke with Gregory for nearly 2 hours. His tone was measured but firm. "This isn't just wrongful termination, Melody. From what you're describing, this could be securities fraud. Don't sign anything. Secure those documents. I'll arrange a meeting Monday morning with my team." When I hung up, I realized I wasn't trembling. I was steady, determined. The fear they counted on hadn't come, only resolve. The next day, the calls began. Janet from HR leaving apologetic voicemails. David himself, his tone sharp with false concern. "We need those papers signed today, Melody. I can even come by your house to pick them up." Then the company's counsel threatening that I could lose my severance entirely if I didn't comply. Their desperation was confirmation. They weren't trying to save money. They were trying to bury me with silence. By late afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David Langston standing on my porch, his expensive suit drenched by the rain. "This is ridiculous, Melody," he called. "Just sign the papers and we can all move on." He slid an envelope into my mailbox and left. Inside was the same agreement with a note scrawled in his hand. Final opportunity. Signed by 9:00 a.m. Monday. I held the envelope over the trash before setting it aside. I didn't need to open it. My path was already set. That night Elizabeth called for our weekly chat. I tried to sound normal, but she heard it anyway. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "I was terminated yesterday," I admitted softly. "What? But your pension is due in days." "They can't do that." "They did," I said. Then I straightened my voice. "But don't worry, sweetheart, I'm handling it." She offered to fly home immediately, but I told her no. I didn't want her to see me like this, surrounded by evidence of betrayal. Not yet. After the call, I sat in the quiet darkness of my living room, the fireproof box open on the coffee table beside me. I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was about to fight back. And come Monday, the company that thought it had silenced me would learn just how wrong they were. Monday morning came with a sharp chill in the Minnesota air. I walked into the Securities and Exchange Commission's regional office, carrying the fireproof box like it was an extension of my own body. My pulse raced, but I kept reminding myself of Thomas's words. "Integrity isn't convenient, it's necessary." Gregory Santos greeted me in the lobby. His hair had gone grayer, but his eyes were just as I remembered, steady, trustworthy. "Melody," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "You did the right thing." He led me into a conference room where 3 other officials waited, their laptops open, their expressions grave. I laid the box on the table and opened it. Pages of records spilled out. Contracts, emails, annotated reports. I documented everything I said quietly. Every time they told me to look the other way, every number that didn't add up, every directive to fix something that wasn't broken. I knew it would come to this. For the next 4 hours I walked them through it all. The falsified safety inspections, the backdated environmental clearances, the way David had hidden losses by shifting funds between subsidiaries, and finally the termination letter timed to deny me my pension. When I finished, the room was silent. One of the younger investigators, a woman named Leah, finally spoke. "This isn't just fraud, this is systemic corruption. They've built an entire empire on lies." Gregory leaned forward. "Melody, I can't promise this will be quick, but with your evidence we have grounds for subpoenas, audits, even indictments. And as for your termination, this isn't just wrongful dismissal, this is retaliation." Something inside me exhaled for the first time in days. Retaliation. They had tried to strip me of dignity, but in their cruelty they had handed me the very weapon that could undo them. By the time I left the SEC office, the snow was beginning to fall. My phone buzzed with another voicemail from David. His voice strained now. "We really need to finalize this, Melody. I don't want things to get messy." Messy. The word almost made me laugh. 2 weeks passed and the storm began to build. Subpoenas were issued quietly. Internal audits launched. Then the whispers started in the business community. GRW under investigation. Possible fraud at manufacturing giant. Janet from HR called me in a panic one evening. "Melody, they're tearing the place apart. People are being interviewed, files are missing. David hasn't been seen in days. What did you do?" I hesitated, then answered with a steadiness I barely recognized as my own. "I told the truth, Janet. That's all I did." The following Monday, I was summoned to testify before a preliminary hearing. I sat before a panel of attorneys and regulators, my voice calm as I recounted what I had lived through. There were moments when my throat tightened, talking about missing Elizabeth's childhood milestones, about Thomas urging me to hold the line even when I was exhausted, but I didn't falter. When the proceedings ended, Leah walked me to the elevator. "You know," she said softly, "you may not just get your pension back. You could end up reshaping this entire company's future." That night Elizabeth called again. She had seen the first article break online: "Whistleblower exposes possible fraud at GRW Manufacturing." "Mom," she said, her voice thick with pride. "That's you, isn't it?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Dad would be so proud." Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't just from grief this time. They were from something I hadn't felt in years: vindication. The next morning, the company's board released a statement. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and take these allegations seriously. David's name was conspicuously absent. I knew then the tide had turned. For the first time in decades, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. And I intended to use it not for revenge, but for justice. The headlines spread like wildfire. GRW Manufacturing under federal investigation. Whistleblower alleges fraud and retaliation. News anchors spoke my name as though I had become both villain and hero overnight. Some praised me as brave, others accused me of disloyalty. But I knew the truth. I hadn't betrayed the company. They had betrayed me. On a gray Wednesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Melody, this is Claire Walters from Channel 9 News. We'd like to interview you on camera." I hesitated, the weight of the request pressing down. My whole life I had worked in the shadows, reviewing fine print, ensuring compliance. I had never wanted to be the face of a scandal. But then I remembered Elizabeth's voice. "Dad would be proud." "No," I said softly. "Not yet. My testimony is for the courts, not for the cameras." Instead, I watched from my living room as the media frenzy unfolded. Stock prices for GRW plummeted. Analysts questioned how long the company could survive. And somewhere in that collapsing empire was David Langston, the man who had thought he could erase me with a single envelope. Janet from HR called again, this time with fear etched into every word. "They're saying David cleaned out his office. The board suspended him pending the investigation. People are terrified, Melody. Files are missing, phones are being confiscated. We don't know who's safe anymore." I closed my eyes, the image of my colleagues flashing before me. For years I had sat beside them, shared lunches, carried their burdens. Many of them were complicit, not out of malice, but out of fear. And now, they were trapped in the same storm that once threatened to swallow me. A week later, I received a formal notice to appear at the grand jury proceedings. The room was colder, more official than the earlier hearings. Rows of jurors sat stone-faced as prosecutors displayed the documents I had collected. Each forged signature, each falsified date, each email where David instructed us to adjust the numbers lit up on the screen like a wound exposed. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. I worked for GRW for 29 years. I believed in integrity. I believed in building something that would outlast me. But somewhere along the line, those at the top decided shortcuts were easier than honesty. And when I refused to stay silent, they fired me. Not because of budgets, not because of performance, because I was 3 days from my pension and because I knew too much. Silence hung heavy after I finished. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. The jurors scribbled furiously. As I stepped out of the courthouse, flashes from cameras blinded me. Reporters shouted my name, their voices colliding into chaos. I shielded my face, wishing desperately for the quiet of my kitchen. But amidst the noise, one phrase reached me clearly. "She's the one who stood up." That night, Elizabeth flew in from Denver. She walked into my home with open arms and tear-filled eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "you're not alone anymore." We sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, while the fireproof box, now nearly empty, rested on the counter. "You kept every record," she said, shaking her head in awe. "It's like you knew." "I didn't know this exactly," I admitted. "But I knew dishonesty doesn't stay buried forever, and I wasn't going to let them bury me with it." In the weeks that followed, indictments were handed down. David Langston was arrested on charges of securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and retaliation. Several executives resigned quietly, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. GRW Manufacturing announced a massive restructuring plan, though no one knew if the company would survive the damage. Through it all, I kept waiting for the feeling of triumph, for the rush of victory. But what I felt instead was something quieter, heavier. A sadness for the years I had given, for the colleagues who had once trusted me, for the company that could have been great if only its leaders had chosen honesty. Still beneath that sadness was something stronger, peace. For the first time in decades, I slept without the gnawing weight of secrets. I had spoken the truth, and the world had listened. Winter came early that year, the kind of sharp, cutting cold that freezes your breath the moment you step outside. I watched the snow fall outside my living room window as I brewed tea, the headlines still scrolling across the TV in the background. Former executive pleads guilty in GRW fraud case. Company agrees to $400 million settlement. Whistleblower's testimony shakes industry. My name wasn't in every headline anymore, but people knew. Neighbors stopped me in the grocery store. Strangers sent letters to my P.O. box thanking me for standing up. Even old colleagues reached out apologizing for not having the courage to join me sooner. One envelope stood out among the rest. It came from the Federal Pension Board. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was the confirmation not only had my pension been reinstated, but all benefits were backdated with interest. 29 years were no longer erased. The life I had built, the security I had earned, was mine again. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, tears spilling onto the letter. Thomas's photo sat on the counter, his familiar smile in that navy uniform. "We did it," I whispered. "We finally did it." Elizabeth squeezed my shoulder from behind. She had been staying with me since the hearings, refusing to let me face the aftermath alone. "Dad would be so proud of you," she murmured. But more than proud, I thought he would be relieved. Relieved that integrity had prevailed, that his wife had not been silenced, that the truth had broken through the walls of corruption. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a compliance conference in Chicago. As I stood on stage in front of hundreds of professionals, I realized I was no longer just Melody Reynolds, the woman who spent her life buried in contracts. I was a symbol of something larger. "I am not here to tell you revenge is sweet," I said, my voice steady. "Because it isn't. What I gained cannot erase the years I lost, the nights I missed with my daughter, the sacrifices that were taken for granted. But I can tell you this silence is what corruption counts on. And the moment one person refuses to be silent, everything begins to change." The audience rose to their feet, their applause washing over me like a tide. And in that moment I knew I had found a new purpose. Not just to collect what was owed to me, but to remind others that their voices mattered too. Back home, life became quieter. I tended to my garden, cooked meals with Elizabeth when she visited, and took long walks by the river Thomas and I once loved. The bitterness that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a calm resilience. Sometimes I thought back to David, how small he had looked the day he was led out in handcuffs. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred would have chained me to the past. Instead, I pitied him. He had built his life on shortcuts and deceit, and in the end it had crumbled beneath him. But me, I had built my life on truth. And though it had cost me dearly, the foundation still stood. To those of you listening, I want you to take this with you. You are not powerless. You are not disposable. Even when they try to strip you of everything, your dignity, your work, your worth, you still have the most powerful tool of all, the truth. I spent nearly 3 decades thinking loyalty was my greatest gift. But what I learned is that loyalty without integrity is chains. It keeps you silent when you should speak, still when you should rise. So if you ever find yourself in the place I was standing, on the edge of betrayal, remember this: you are stronger than you know. And when you choose truth, no matter how terrifying, you light a fire that no one can extinguish. If my story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who may need courage today, subscribe for more, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever found strength in speaking up when silence was easier? I'd love to hear your story.